watch this vidcast or I'll gouge your eyes out.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
And I'm James Rivera. You know, it's been a long week for everybody with the elections going on and the post-Halloween blues, so we're going to help you decompress with this podcast. We got some interesting movies and events to talk about, but before we get to that, we have to get to...
Horror Show News.
So our first news story is Neil Marshall returns to horror with The Lair. And of course, as many horror fans know, he directed Dog Soldiers in 2002, The Descent in 2005. Then he did a lot of TV for a few years. He did Game of Thrones, Constantine, Hannibal, and then did a short film for Tales of Halloween, which was a good little anthology film. And then he did Hellboy in 2019, a Hellboy remake, which I liked and literally nobody else did. Mm-hmm. And then just this year, it's still in festivals. He did The Reckoning, about a woman accused of being a witch. Mm-hmm. But it's just now in festivals. We're not sure about when that's going to be released. And now he's signed on to do The Lair. Here's a synopsis for The Lair. Royal Air Force pilot Lieutenant Kate Sinclair, who is on her final flight mission when her jet is shot down over one of the most dangerous rebel strongholds of Afghanistan. She finds refuge in an abandoned underground bunker where deadly man-made creatures, half human, half alien, and hungry for human flesh, are awakened. Sinclair barely escapes and unknowingly leads the creatures, known as Ravagers, back to a U.S. Army base. That already sounds good, but it sounds very similar to the Overlord that just came out. Mm-hmm. And it sounds a lot like a mixture of Dog Soldiers and The Descent. The Descent having the strong female characters, and then Dog Soldiers having the soldiers fighting monsters. But this is what really gets me excited about it, what Marshall says about it. Neil Marshall says, if The Reckoning was a gothic drama in testament to the power and resilience of women, then The Lair is my true return to full-blooded horror and intense genre action in the style of Dog Soldiers, The Descent, and Doomsday. I'm making something scary as hell, pulse-pounding, and great fun. This is a crowd pleaser, an adrenaline-pumping roller coaster ride, spectacular and loud, inspired by classic genre movies like Aliens, Predator, and The Thing, and their incredible use of practical creature effects. Featuring a new breed of screen terror, The Lair will be a snarling, ravenous beast of a movie. I'm going to get my hands bloody making this one. Mm-hmm. That really makes me excited to see this one.
Anytime you mention The Thing, practical effects, if that's what you're going for, that automatically means I'm already on board.
So yeah, and he wants to return to some really scary, gut-wrenching horror like in Dog Soldiers and The Descent. Mm-hmm. I'm all for that one. I've been waiting for him to return to that type of horror for years, and he's finally going to do it. Another one I'm pretty excited about, Jordan Peele is producing a remake of People Under the Stairs. Peele is teaming with Universal Studios to produce it, and Wes Craven was actually working on a TV series for People Under the Stairs prior to his death, and mm-hmm. This will be the first film of Craven's that is remade since his death. Of course, as we know, The Last House on the Left was remade, The Hills Have Eyes, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and even Scream for TV. Two out of those was better than the original, I felt. And then Scream 5 is also being made by the
one.
Yeah. Scream 5 is also being made by the directors Matt Bettinelli Open and Tyler Gillett, who did Ready or Not. Mm-hmm. And as we know, People Under the Stairs follows the story of a child and two adult thieves who break into a house to steal rare coins and end up trapped by the Robinsons, who are hiding people under the stairs.
I'm pretty excited for this. I noticed a lot of people complaining about it. What I find interesting about this one is the People Under the Stairs isn't like Scream or A Nightmare on Elm Street or even The Last House on the Left or The Hills Have Eyes. It doesn't have that same kind of influence in horror and pop culture. It's more of like if you're a serious fan. So I find it interesting that they're choosing to go that route. And I think that means they could play with it more because I feel general audiences are less familiar with the People Under the Stairs than they are with a lot of Wes Craven's other movies. I'm glad Jordan Peele's not directing it because I would rather him do original stuff. But I like his creative influence and his input and things. So I think it's really cool that he is having a hand in bringing this to the screen. So I'm pretty excited for this one. Whatever happens, I hope it's good. And like you said, I didn't really, until you mentioned it, I didn't realize that Wes Craven had that many of his works remade until this moment. I'm actually kind of blown away that he has that many remakes of his movies.
Yeah, and People Under the Stairs is probably more ripe for a remake than any of the others that were remade, you know?
The social commentary and the things that it's about are things that would be relevant in today's political climate and today's world. And I know that's going to trigger some people out there who feel like, oh, I'm tired of the politics in my entertainment. Suck it up.
Yeah,
Like,
there's been politics and horror since the beginning of
yeah,
horror genre.
yeah, you're barely catching on now. So,
And I'm really excited over what Jordan Peele means to horror.
mhm.
Period. Everything he's producing, everything he's directing. Even though I didn't like Us, I liked what it did for the horror genre, and it's one that I need to go back and revisit. But all the stuff he's producing, I mean, not every single one sticks, but most of them are. Most of them are really good stuff. He's really putting attention into detail, and he's hiring some really talented people to work on these movies. And like I was telling somebody else, you know, you can complain all you want about it, Hollywood not having any original ideas, but it's simply easier to get a budget for a remake. If something is a pre-existing IP, the studios will just throw money at it because it keeps making money. So if people will stop going to see remakes, studios will stop making them. But they probably never will. So you're going to keep seeing these. So you might as well see one done by a talented filmmaker.
Yeah, that's what I think. If we're gonna have remakes, let's do them right and let's add something new. And I think that's The People Under the Stairs in particular is one that you could use, I imagine anyway, using the basic structure and adding all kinds of new elements to it. So I think it's possible to do an original movie that's like Suspiria. That's a great example.
Yeah.
For all I know, that's a remake, and I know it has the bare bones of the original Suspiria, but for all intents and purposes, it's pretty much an original movie that's, I would say, more inspired by Suspiria than anything else, and it is a direct remake. So I'm okay with that idea because you could do a remake and still make an original film if you know how to do it right.
Yeah, and later on in this episode, we're going to talk about one of the greatest remakes ever made, and that's the template of how you make an excellent remake. We'll talk about that later on.
Yeah, so I have nothing negative to say about this at all.
Me neither. More Jordan Peele. Do more.
Do more.
All right, so we're going to talk about the stuff we did this season. The first thing that I did, everything I did this season, of course, I did with Sylvester Hernandez. I call him Newt, one of my best friends, and he always comes through with the events. And the first one we went to was LA Haunted Hayride. This one was cool. It had cool little vignettes as you drive in, little like a tractor trailer with the devil on top of it, or a little haunted house or something. But it had like stationary ghouls, like statues there on the way in. So that's just as you drive in, and then you get into a drive-in, which is a lot of haunted attractions this year where our drive-in motif. So you pull into a drive-in, and on screen is like a really campy production of like a singing rockabilly type of ghoul guy. And then he sings like these silly songs in between these silly horror songs, which is entertaining. It has a big light show. And then they have Crypt TV shorts, which you could see on YouTube. They were okay. They were pretty good. So they played those in between, and there were huge spotlights. Like it's a big production, like huge spotlights. Whenever there was a jump scare, the lights come out at you. And then there's ghouls that run around and attack the car. But the ghouls were not that scary as far as the way they looked, but they were loud and noisy. So they were like doing a lot of running up the cars and shaking a gas can full of rocks or something. So they were noisy, but not that scary and not that inventive as far as makeup and stuff goes. But overall, it was a cool experience. One thing that could have made it a lot better, when you're driving in and you're waiting in line to get into the drive-in, they have all those vignettes and stuff. Why not just have some scare actors in there running out to the cars? I'm not sure why they didn't do that. It would have made it a much better, made it much more worth the admission, you know?
I think it's probably because these drive-in haunts are a pretty new concept, and I think people are less seasoned in how to put them on or how to do it right. I mean, I don't want this pandemic to go on any longer, so I don't want to say maybe next year they'll have learned their lessons, because I hope the attractions are back to normal. But I think I think it could be it's something new, and it's hasn't had a chance to be perfected. We're all
Yeah.
trying to adapt into the new climate of the world.
Well, that's the way I was kind of shocked that LA Haunted Hayride is this thing that's going to be going on for quite a few years. And then it was okay, but then we went to another one. You went with us on this one later on in the month. We went to Joe Bob's Haunted Drive-In,
Which
this
is
was in
a film festival and something of a, well, I don't know how to put, you say it. It's
yeah. This was at a swap meet / drive-in in Torrance, California. This one was much smaller than the Haunted Hayride, much more intimate with a better atmosphere, but it was almost the same thing. Like you drive in to a drive-in and you watch short films and you got ghouls running around in between. But the difference is, first of all, we got to meet Joe Bob, Darcy, and Felissa Rose.
mm-hmm.
And it would have already been a better event than LA Haunted Hayride, even if they had not been there. So that was a huge bonus. The short films were much better. Instead of being kind of lazy, which Haunted Hayride did, and going to Crypt TV and just getting a bunch of shorts from them, they actually reached out to filmmakers like us, which I was ready to be kind of sad and depressed because we entered our short films into this festival and we did not get chosen. But as we sat and watched these short films, every single one was solid, well made. Some of them were even scary. A lot of them were really funny, a lot of fun. And then Joe Bob's commentary in between, he always makes films better with his commentary. So all the commentary in between Joe Bob and Darcy was all like one of the best Joe Bob episodes. Like it's a Joe Bob episode turned up to 10. They were on point. They were all funny. Every gag worked. And then the ghouls that came around to your car, they were much better than the LA Haunted Hayride. Their makeup was better. Yeah, they were like zombies, and they were contorting their bodies, and they were being more silent than the ghouls at the LA Haunted Hayride, which would give you a jolt. But these ghouls, these zombies at the Joe Bob's Haunted Drive-In, they'd be up on your window, and they'd be sitting there staring at you, and you wouldn't even know they're there, and you turn around. So I actually got more frights out of that. But it's less noisy, but more scary. It was much longer with a lot more shorts and a lot higher caliber shorts, and every second was entertaining. And then on top of all that, Joe Bob and Darcy stayed until they were kicked out to sign autographs.
Yeah. So
it was very much for the fans, and you could tell that Joe Bob and Darcy cares a lot for their fans, and they wanted to give them a really cool event. So it was much lower scale than the LA Haunted Hayride, but I thought it was much better, much more fun.
Yeah, I agree too. Also, because Joe Bob and Darcy were doing a film festival, and the Haunt, I guess I could understand why you get lazy. You're not going to reach out to submissions when you could just go to Crypt TV. So for me, it was something that was geared towards hardcore horror fans. And if you're into Joe Bob Briggs, The Last Drive-In, his Shudder special, if you've been following him since he's been on TNT and the movie channel, then you're already the diehard of the diehard horror fans if you're going to be going to one of his festivals. And Joe Bob Briggs is a big thing that's helped me get through the quarantine, going through all of his the movies that he hosts on Shudder, hearing his commentary on B movies and exploitation movies and slashers and trash cinema. So it was kind of surreal to get to meet him. And what struck me most about Joe Bob was he's not, at least based on my impression, he doesn't come across how he comes on his show. I actually was slightly intimidated. I figured he'd be a cool person, but he has, that kind of gruff Texan personality. But when you meet him in person, he's a lot warm. He's very warm. He's like, "Hey, what's your name?" He has like a very warm, inviting voice, extremely friendly, very chatty, easy to talk to. So he's actually much more easygoing than he even comes across on his television show. And of course, Darcy was really sweet. And you could tell that they just were there because they enjoyed meeting the fans. So it was a pretty awesome experience. I did get scared a couple of times at a couple of the zombies. Like they genuinely were good at popping up when you're not paying attention to them. So you would just look to the right and see somebody in your face without realizing it. So it did a pretty good job of that. I thought it was a really fun event. I had a blast. Meeting Felissa Rose was also really cool. Felissa Rose, Angela from Sleepaway Camp.
Yeah.
Really cool person, really nice. It's always a nice reminder of how warm and inviting most of the horror community is.
Yeah, the whole, everyone that even, that likes Joe Bob as much as we do, it's all just a really cool community.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even a Facebook group for Joe Bob show, and it's a cool group, one of the coolest groups on Facebook, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, Joe Bob was so warm and he's so nice to us, and he was asking about our podcast. And you even talked to Darcy about our podcast. She might be coming on pretty soon.
Yeah, I've been in contact with her over Twitter, and she's a really sweet person. They're also very tall too. Nick, my short ass, towering.
Oh yeah,
my short ass.
And I wrote a little review on the Joe Bob's Haunted Drive-In Instagram page. I wrote a little review, and she came on right away and thanked me and thanked me for coming. So that was really cool.
Yeah, so that was a really good experience, but there's more.
So on Halloween, we were a bit bummed that Halloween was on a Saturday this year and a full moon and all that. So we were ready to party for Halloween, but of course the lockdown kind of squashed that. So I figured out a way for us to be in the Halloween spirit without the normal parties and stuff. So what I figured is we would go to, again, we went with my friend Newt, Sylvester Hernandez, and we toured some horror film locations. So we started out, we went to the Asylum from Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, and it's actually the UCLA campus Royce Hall. It's a concert hall. Mm-hmm. So that's where we went to the little corridor, the little hallway where the doctor keeps seeing Freddy's mom, or what turns out to be Freddy's mom, the nun. And then the little archway up top on the top floor where the kid comes out being pulled by the veins in his wrist.
From Dream Warriors.
Yeah, and Freddy kind of appears on the top of the building, and he kind of runs him like a marionette puppet before pushing him off. So we got to see all that and take pictures and everything. And then we moved on to LA, which is Nancy's house from Nightmare on Elm Street, the original one, and also Johnny Depp's house, which was across the street. And this was right smack dab in LA off of Sunset Boulevard. So it's in one of the little suburbs right off Sunset Boulevard. So that was really cool. And they kept the house, the Nightmare on Elm Street house, exactly the same as we remember. The door's a little different, but it's still red. And then we moved on to South Pasadena, which is where we saw Michael Myers' house from Halloween, Laurie Strode's house, and also the hedge.
Wait, I thought that was Haddonfield, Illinois.
Oh, no.
Somebody's been lying to me, Michael.
So that was all in South Pasadena. So what they did is, I was a little confused when I first found Michael Myers' house. It's like right next to, like, some railroad tracks go right in front of it. And I'm like, that doesn't look anything like that location. So what happened was a few years back, they were going to tear down the Michael Myers house to make room for some apartments. So I think it was the mayor insisted on moving it. So they moved it over by the railroad tracks. And then someone bought the house right next to it and opened up a gallery called the Sugar Mint Gallery. So it's I'll put up pictures on the page, but it basically had like Michael Myers statues and like some of the original masks from the movie, a lot of artwork, and then you go out into the backyard. There's a lot of photo opportunities with Michael Myers standing in the clothesline with sheets everywhere and stuff. So that was a really cool. It's like $20 to get in. So I don't know if it's actually worth, it's a small little intimate place, but it's cool to support.
It's for the fans.
Yes, so support that so other fans can come from all over and see it. And it was pretty packed for being a lockdown around in that area. It's a very festive area. It seems like everybody there, even the people who own the Laurie Strode's house, they put a pumpkin out on the stoop for people to take pictures.
That's not Laurie Strode's house. That's the house on the corner, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, I didn't get to go to that one with you, but you did post one picture from Instagram that I found really funny. It's you standing in the same position by the same bush that Michael appears at when Annie and Laurie are walking home, and Annie mocks Laurie for seeing men behind bushes. What
Yeah.
struck me about that picture, the first thing was like, that bush is still fucking there. Um,
Yeah.
I'm kind of, it's nice to know that that community has kind of like embraced the legacy of Halloween, and because it's such an iconic American film and it's a big part of pop culture at this point. I imagine that the people in that area would be very festive, or to be have kind of like a little bit of a tourist location or a piece of pop culture history right there. So
Yeah.
that's pretty awesome.
Everywhere we went to take pictures, like Laurie Strode's house and the hedge, there was
Hmm.
a little a little line of people at each place,
Hmm.
like to take pictures. And then there was a guy that was dressed up like Michael Myers at the Michael Myers house, standing in front of it, taking pictures with people. And I think he was just some dude who came there to see it, and just people started wanting to take pictures with him. But he actually looked better than a lot of the Michael Myers from the movies. So that
Interesting.
was really cool to take pictures with him. And then we came home later that night and watched As Above, So Below. Newt hadn't seen it, and my wife Adina had not seen it. And then after that, we completely nerded out on Nightmare on Elm Street 3 because
Hmm.
we had just gone to that location earlier. So it ended up being a pretty fun Halloween.
Yeah.
But then after Halloween, to cure the Halloween blues, Newt was nice enough to get us tickets to the Stranger Things experience. This is one of the highlights. I mean, because we met Joe, Bob, and Darcy, that's still my favorite event of the season. But this is a very close second. The Stranger Things experience was clearly high production value. Adult actors that looked exactly like the characters from Stranger Things, and they're running around and interacting with people in the cars. Now, this one, it's about an hour experience, and
Really
I
quick,
thought it was,
is that still going on?
yeah, it's still going on for a while. I think through November.
Okay, so if you're in the LA, Southern California area, you guys in that audience have a chance to go to this. And if you're a fan of Stranger Things, it was pretty fun. I'd highly recommend it.
They did not mess around on this one. So you you enter in, and they did just what I thought LA Haunted Hayride should have done. While you're waiting in line, they start the experience already. So you're kind of waiting in this one spot where it's like you're in the Starcourt Mall. You're immersed in the Starcourt Mall in the 80s, and there's performers and aerobics instructors on stage, just like a cheesy little production like they would have in a mall. And then everything starts glitching. So this is where you wait to get in, and then when you go in, it's a parking structure. So you then enter this high-rise parking structure and drive in a spiral all the way up to the top, which already gives you a cool feeling. And then you get almost to the top, and there's this little section that you pull into, and everybody parks. And then you see soldiers come out and scientists, and they start interacting with the people in the cars. And then the Demogorgon comes out and starts attacking the scientists. Really cool. It's a guy in a suit, but it's a really cool Demogorgon. And then through each part of the experience, there's screens on the walls.
Hmm.
So on the screens is things to make it even more immersive, very realistic looking backdrops.
Yeah.
And then you advance to the top of the place where you get to the climax, and you pull into another little parking spot up on top. And then all the way in front of you is a big line of screens, and on each side of you. And what was really cool about that is they had soldiers and scientists, and then they're chasing the characters from the show, and you see the Demogorgon comes in up there, and they have this big climax where everything that the actors and the performers are doing is kind of mirrored on the screens behind them. So you get parts of the show on the screen with the people acting and out in front, and then with the part of the climax was 11 falling, and that's the part where she's falling into the upside down, and
Hmm.
she actually flips this way and turns upside down. So that was really cool. They actually had the actress up on wires
Yeah.
flipping her around. So that was all really cool. Like I said, really high production value. You could really see the production in everything, and a lot of attention to detail, a lot of fun. The performers were really into it. So I just love the whole thing from beginning to end. They didn't waste any time of that hour that you're immersed in that experience.
Yeah, it was a pretty fun experience. Probably wouldn't have happened that way if it weren't for the lockdown, but it's cool to see a lot of events being put on like this and still people still being able to have fun even in the middle of a pandemic. And it was a pretty elaborate show. You could tell that they took a lot of time, effort, and detail into it. I had a great time. I even ate some of the Star Court food. Really
Oh, yeah.
overpriced, but I mean, I think you do it just for the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. I liked how the characters would come up right up to your window and kind of,
Act out scenes from the show.
yeah. They're like doing four of the actors were doing a whole scene like right next to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what was going on at first. I thought it was real. Like the guy threw down a microphone and he was almost crying down on the floor.
Yeah.
And our friend Sergio was like, "Why are you crying?"
We went to that event that was me, you, our friend Newt, who does all the events, and our other friend Sergio, who is another one who comes with us a lot. So I only went to a couple of those events. I had fun. Yeah, I hope you all had a happy Halloween out there. I know some people are probably going to be sad. I know Halloween's over, the horror season's over. But remember, if you're a true horror fan, Halloween is all year round. We have Christmas coming up, and Christmas is actually a cool holiday for horror, believe it or not. So many Christmas horror movies.
Christmas horror films have become a pretty huge subgenre.
Not only that, if you pay attention, I don't know how it's going to be this year, obviously, with the pandemic, but almost every Christmas, if you pay attention, they do counter programming. A lot of horror films are released on Christmas Day normally. And I know because I went to go see a lot of horror movies. I think it's pretty interesting that more horror movies are released around Christmas time than they are at Halloween. And I think it's the idea behind it is counter programming, is that when things are so over like saturated with one thing, people want to go in the opposite direction. So horror movies tend to do very well at the box office around Christmas season.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to some more good horror films this year.
I think
We'll see if there still will be because of the big gap in production from the lockdown.
Yep.
Oh, and by the way, if anybody wants to go check it out, the Sugar Mint Gallery in Michael Myers' house in South Pasadena, that stuff's open all year. So they do that all year long. So you can go do that and do what we did on Halloween, tour all the different horror film locations. That's just a handful of horror films that were filmed in LA. There's tons of them. Yep. So you can do that anytime. It's a lot of fun.
Yep. Now we're going to discuss two movies, The Blob and The Blob.
Yeah, the first one is The Blob from 1958. Surprisingly, this is the first time I've seen this one.
Really?
I watched it for the podcast, yeah. It's directed by Irvin S. Yeaworth Jr. It's based on his original idea, and it stars the great Steve McQueen and Annetta Corsant in her first feature film. Mm-hmm. And this was surprisingly much more successful than the remake, even though I don't think it's nearly as good. And I already knew it was going to be cheesy when it opened up to that silly "Beware of the Blob" song.
Oh, it's total 50s.
Yeah,
it's kind of in the tradition. If you're aware of like those teenage rebellion movies in the 50s, like you ever heard of Gidget?
Oh yeah,
stuff like that. To me, it's a horror movie that's kind of in that spirit where like even Rebel Without a Cause with James Dean. I think the 50s is where you started to see a kind of, I don't know if you would call it exploitation, but there's like a B movie genre that revolves around the burgeoning teen culture at the time. Because I think in the 1950s, that was the first time when what teenagers were into became dominant in pop culture, and it's all over this movie. Like I think the movie's kind of a time capsule. You can see a lot of things, a lot of like social attitudes and the way that teenagers are. Get a good idea by watching The Blob.
Yeah, but for me, it's, especially after being so familiar with the remake for so many years, and finally watching this one, it just came off as way too overly simple for me.
Hmm. Well, here's another interesting thing about this movie. It was designed. It's a B movie to be, for one thing. It was designed to play at the bottom of a bill. It was just meant to fill out time. And the studio just thought of it as this cheap ass movie that they were just going to toss off just to fucking fill out their bills. And what happened? I forgot what the movie was, but there was another movie that was at the top of the bill. And the Blob is the one that became the pop culture hit. So the studio had to switch it around and make a B movie the kind of an A movie. So this was the beginning of B movies kind of sneaking their way into pop culture at the time. And I know it is pretty overly simplistic, but given that this was made in the 1950s, I think it's pretty inventive in terms of what it does. The actual blob effect, of course, cannot compete with what they did in the 1980s, but it's also not realistic to expect them to either.
Yeah,
It still looked pretty good. There's a couple of shots that are cheesy, and some of the movie is kind of laughable. That opening song is goofy. Steve
right.
McQueen's performance is good. He has a lot of charisma and star power and screen presence, and you could see it there. But I think he became a better actor as his career went on. But I could see this is the movie that kind of broke him into the mainstream and made him a star.
Yeah, I was excited to see Steve McQueen. I'm a Steve McQueen fan. I was excited to see him in this. But as some of the parts were cringy, like his interaction with cops, especially since you see in the remake with Kevin Dillon's character interacting so much with the cops, it was so much more convincing. But in this one, he he seems uncomfortable and not sure what he's doing with the character,
Hmm.
because he seems like he's stuttering and he's kind of uncomfortable in his own skin and just acting weird. I didn't know what the hell was going on in that scene. I don't know why he was acting that way.
Like I said, I do think it's kind of a rough performance, but the star power is there and the charisma
Yeah,
is there.
you could see it. Yeah, and then that annoying old lady that keeps denying everything and makes silly excuses why the blob doesn't exist,
Hmm.
just to discount everything that Steve McQueen said. Oh no, that's not it. That's something else.
I almost thought she was in on it for a while because she was so in denial about everything. Like you
Yeah,
have to be trying, you have to really be trying to be doing that. I do like the way that the effects looks. It looks gross. It looks weird. The way that it keeps expanding. And I imagine part of the reason that this movie caught on is not just like, of course, the teen pop culture, but I think as a horror concept, it's kind of brilliant when you stop and think about it. As stupid as that sounds, just an amorphous blob that consumes everything. You can't reason with it. You can't talk to it. If you shoot it, it's just going to absorb the bullets. There's really nothing that you could do about it expanding and growing. And I think that it's a completely irrational thing. And I think that's why it probably tapped into a lot of people's fears. The irrational, that with which you cannot reason with, is always scarier. Granted, it is pretty campy and shit, but pretty interesting for a 1950s film.
and I'm convinced that the only reason this is really mega popular is that it had Steve McQueen, and then that one iconic scene of everyone running screaming out of the theater when the blob starts coming into the theater.
Yeah.
Because it was some kind of silly, funny ways that it was kind of oozing into the windows. You could tell it was miniatures
Hmm.
where the blob was oozing into the window. But just that image of everybody running and screaming out of the theater, it must have been a really unforgettable image to watch back in the 50s.
Yeah.
Because it kind of mirrors the experience of going to the theater and what if something like that was real, and then being in a theater while people were running screaming out of the theater from a giant blob. I'm sure was cathartic.
And this movie is kind of like I've always I hadn't seen it since I was a kid, but it always brings back memories. My grandpa showed this movie to me when I was a little kid. I think it was something that, like, a big memory from him from his youth. Remember when he used to tell me how that movie was such a big deal and everybody wanted to go see the Blob at the time. So
Yeah.
it's a cool little time capsule, but it's certainly dated in a lot of respects. Like you said, a lot of it's cheesy. Some of the acting is rickety, and a lot of it's goofy. The song at the beginning kind of clues you in that what you're going to be watching is not to be taken too seriously. But overall, I had a good time with it. It's a fun time capsule movie.
Yeah, and the one part where I really felt that it was the 50s is when they started talking to that little kid,
Hmm.
and they kind of bend down and start talking to him, and then that cheesy music comes in, and it's the total cliche 50s adult talking to a kid moment.
Yep.
And it's like the cheesy dated music that sounds like either like My Three Sons or Leave It to Beaver type of music in the background.
Yeah.
Them trying to relate to the kid. So that was pretty cheesy. And then Steve McQueen and all those other dudes running around in this silly search of the monsters. But for me, it was just a lot of silliness and campiness without a lot of fun.
Mm.
Like there was a couple times with the blob, like with it on the old man's hand, it looked kind of cool. And there was a couple times when it was kind of overtaking everything. It looked kind of cool, but it was never really that. I've seen some other 50s and 60s monster movies, and they have this element of fun to go with the campiness. But this was just too silly for me.
It was
But
definitely by the standards. Another reason I think that it tapped into, like, it was popular with teens, because like we were talking about at the time, like teen culture kind of took over pop culture with like rock and roll music and what people were into. And every teenager is telling the truth in this movie. And every adult, like the cliche is, nobody believes them, and it ends up being to their own it ends up costing them the fact that none of the adults believe the kids. So I think it also kind of captured the tension that was going on at the time, the way that the older generation rejected rock and roll, this crazy new style that kids were doing, driving around in cars and partying and stuff like that. So I think it kind of captured at the time the tension between the generational shift. And I think that's another movie. It kind of probably validated for a lot of teenagers at the time, like, yes, we are right, and this is what happens when you adults don't really listen to us.
yeah, but another thing I didn't like about it though was the Jane character.
Hmm.
I mean, she was good and everything, but just in the 50s and 60s, there were so many female characters, especially in horror films, that would just completely fall apart at the sight of horror. And she would like, there was one part where what was that part? Where Jane sees the blob and she just screams and falls on her ass and drops the dog. Like,
But that's
everybody
also,
else is running around trying to get away from it, and she just like, she could easily just take a few steps away from it and get away from it, but no, she screams and drops the dog and just goes
but
hysterical. And then throughout the rest of the movie, she goes hysterical a few times where all the men have to gather around her and comfort her because she's going hysterical.
see, that's another thing. I don't think that's actually done on purpose. It's just indicative of the era that it was made in. Comes from an era when people believed that women were supposed to stay in the kitchen, and most women at that time were portrayed as weak, fragile, that they all need a man to help them out. It's very drenched in 1950s gender norms that have since been shattered in a long time. So a lot of things like that kind of clue you into what the era was and how people were. That's probably why so many 1950s movies horror movies especially have horrible portrayals of women. It's kind of opposite later, where horror is now more dominated by strong women, and of course the concept of the final girl. But it takes you back to a time when society was still a little backwards. Well, more than a
Yeah.
little backwards, actually.
And the climax too was just terribly anticlimactic. You know, everyone brings fire extinguishers, and it's amazing how much the remake mirrors the original.
Hmm.
Like it takes everything cool about the original and turns it up to 10 and
Hmm.
makes it 10 times cooler. And where the especially the final shot where we find out that the blob doesn't like cold, so you see a helicopter or something go drop it in the middle of the Arctic.
Definitely goofy. But it was remade in 1988, right?
Yeah, this one was directed and co-written by Chuck Russell, who did Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Mask with Jim Carrey, Eraser with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And he's also rumored to be directing a Witchboard remake, which should be interesting. And this one was co-written by Frank Darabont.
From
And
Shawshank Redemption and The Walking Dead.
yeah, and these two also worked together on Nightmare on Elm Street 3. And these two working together is just lightning in a bottle. I think there's something very special about this movie besides it being just a really good, solid remake and really well made, high production value, great stars. Shawnee Smith and Kevin Dillon were both awesome in it, especially Shawnee Smith. I love her. And it's an old man discovers the meteor, just like in the first one. Two high school students get help from a guy they previously had a problem with, just like the first one. But this one feels more like Steve McQueen movie than the original does, because you got Kevin Dillon running around on a motorcycle, which is exactly the motorcycle that Steve McQueen used to ride in real life.
I think they were kind of reclaiming the image of Steve McQueen, because when the original Blob came out, Steve McQueen was not who we think of Steve McQueen as now. So it's kind of like a, I don't know, kind of redemption for that character.
But according to the director, Kevin Dillon was meant to be just like a bad boy alternative to Paul, which was supposed to be the Steve McQueen character. But he said in the grand scheme of things, he feels that Shawnee Smith was the Steve McQueen character in this.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. This is actually, it is a far better film than the original. It's a lot more fun. It succeeds in the silliness and the campiness where the original failed. And I think what really sets this movie apart for me, what I really like about it is every character in the town seems very well defined by certain personality traits, and it does a good job of establishing the identity of each individual character based on only a small handful of scenes. You could already tell what the sheriff is like, the type of person he is, the type of human being he is. You can tell what each of the main characters are like. Like, it feels like it drops you in the world, familiarizes you with all of it with it pretty rapidly, and you feel very invested in these people's lives. I like the little kid characters are interesting. They really went out of their way to make the whole town feel like a real suburban town, and that's something that I appreciated about it. The banter between a lot of the characters is funny. Some of the dialogue is humorous. A lot of it had me cracking, making me smile. A lot of there's just a sense of fun to this movie, and I think a lot of it comes down to the characters. Of course, the makeup effects are everything, but this movie would not be nearly as engaging if you weren't surrounded by a fun cast of people. So I really loved every character in this movie, and I felt like I knew who each person was. Especially like that little kid who was like listening to the music all the time and talking about slice and dice movies and going to see. That's another thing. I love the Friday the 13th parody that they have in this movie by the kids going to see some slasher flick called Something Massacre. Sounds like a typical 80s slasher. Really reflective of the culture. But the little kid was really funny to me. The one who was blabbing about how we're going to go see a slice and dice flick, the way that he's not paying attention to anybody, always listening to music. I know little kids like that. I've had a little cousin who behaved in that same fashion. So a lot of these personalities were very endearing to me.
And that's another reason why I think this is a perfect remake. Like it had a similar little kid in the first one, but not nearly as effective as the one in this one, and not nearly as genuine. It didn't feel as genuine. And then this surprisingly bombed at the box office. It had a $19 million budget. $9 million of that went toward the effects, and you could see every bit of it on screen. But it only made $8.2 million in the theaters. It had and you can tell it has a 43-person makeup effects crew and a 91-person special effects crew, and you can see all of it. You don't just see the $9 million that they spent on the effects. It looks like they spent more. They took a big budget for a horror film like that and went beyond expectations and made it really cool, especially when the blob drops on the Paul character, and then Meg comes in and sees him being consumed by it, and he's kind of pushing his way through it. You know that you're in for an awesome ride then, and it's going to be excellent and very horror. And
it has, I think the effects are up there with like some of the best 80s effects, like on The Thing, and a lot of Tom Savini's work on like on George Romero movies, like on Day of the Dead. I think I think you could make an argument for this being one of the top 5 special effects driven horror movies because everything in here looks so realistic. The
Yeah.
Blob looks disgusting. It basically improves on everything that the original was doing with it. It looks very amorphous, no miniatures anywhere, and it's gross. It's so gory too. The effects, like you said, are really something else. It kind of took me back.
Yeah, and the interesting little tidbit: the part where Paul was kind of stretching his way through the blob, and Shawnee Smith comes in, her character comes in and sees it. The director deliberately did not tell her that it was going to be the actor in the middle of that stuff. She thought it was going to be something fake that she had to act off of. So when she walks in and sees him kind of stretching through the blob, that's really look of shock and horror on her face when she sees that, because she didn't expect to see that.
Hmm. The kill scenes are creative in this, and I also like the twist, which I don't want to reveal, but I feel like the twist on the origins of the Blob in this movie is a much better explanation than the original movie. It's much more figured out, and it kind of is something. There's a little social commentary in there, I would say, something
Yeah.
about people's greed and how others would allow a small town to burn to the ground or just allow many people to die for the sake of carrying out kind of psychotic delusions. So I don't want to reveal what the twist was, but I think that story twist is so much better than what the original 1950s movie was.
Yeah. And the effect of the guy in the diner getting pulled through the drain.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Oh,
it's so
great.
awesome.
And
I love that effect. I love the like a full-size character being pulled through a small hole. There's something about that effect that I love, and they did it so awesome in this. and then another thing that mirrors the original is the blob attacking the people in the theater. And just like the original, they're watching some cheesy horror film on screen, and then get attacked on this one. And that one's done better as well, as you can imagine.
I liked
And
I liked the really quick. I wanted to say I really liked what they were showing on the screen because for a second you think that what the people are watching in the movie theater is actually part of the film that you're watching, and then you see a Jason-like character in a hockey mask ready to mow down some camp counselors who are about to have sex. Totally funny, and it like is this like the 50s version? Totally tunes you into what was popular at the time. I was like, that makes sense. This movie was made in 1988, and it's kind of like satirizing the popularity of slasher films and the tropes. So I think that was cool that they actually put some effort into actually making a scene and tricking you for a second to thinking that it's actually part of the movie when it's not. Cool little
yeah,
detail that they didn't really have to do and it wasn't really necessary. But I think things like that show you the type of care that went into making this movie and making sure that it was a fun movie.
yeah, and another testament that went into the care they made into it. You remember that part with the partially dissolved soldier that was dying?
Mm-hmm.
That was played by a real soldier. He was a triple amputee who lost both his legs, an arm, and an eye in the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And then they used him as a partially dissolved, because the idea that Frank Darabont and the director came up with is they didn't have a surefire plan going in, but what they knew is that the blob was, they're going to portray it as an inside out stomach, where the acid is on the outside, kind of eating everything that comes into its path.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
So they stayed with that type of premise, and then this awesome battle with the blob at the end that far surpassed the original as well.
Mm-hmm.
The effects are really good. The tactics that they used to do it, it started with the fire extinguishers and then kind of graduated into liquid nitrogen type of thing. So it was a whole, just more attention to detail added to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's somehow through all this, through the high budget, good acting, good writing, it somehow holds on to the campy magic of the first, but just turns everything up to 10. But it's ramped up. Everything's ramped up, and it makes the ultimate remake for me.
Yeah. this was my first time actually watching the remake. I was already familiar with the original, and yeah, it kind of blows what the original did out the water. It's just a refinement of the good qualities about the original with all the bad things taken out and then the good qualities pumped up. And of course, the era that it was in afforded better effects for the blob itself. Um, it goes by really quick. It's a pretty short movie. It's only like an hour and 30 minutes long.
Yeah.
Um, I kind of didn't want it to end. I was hoping it would go on for another 15, 20 minutes because it's one of those horror movies that it's a blast to spend time inside the world. The mad scientist character in the movie, the way that he gets his comeuppance is pretty hilarious. It's
Yeah.
always satisfying to see the human monster in a movie get what's coming to them. Yeah, I liked it a lot.
I just love horror films like this. Just so fast paced. Every scene is filmed with, such glee and such love of the genre.
Mhm.
And to take all the elements that you liked about the first movie and then add more elements that make it even better is just, like I said, the ultimate remake for me.
And there's also a lesson for this in this movie for guys who like to get too touchy with girls without their permission.
Yeah.
One of the best scenes.
Hell yeah. Oh, it's such a great movie.
So yeah, Blob, really, really good. I mean, the first one's, I think the first one is more of like a curiosity than anything. I wouldn't say I would highly recommend it, but I think if you're interested in horror and the history of horror, it's definitely an interesting time capsule movie. But the remake, I would recommend wholeheartedly, and I would say you don't even really need to watch the original to enjoy it. To enjoy the remake, it's not required at all.
Yeah, but the original is worth a watch. I mean, a lot of the reasons why I didn't enjoy it as much is that I had the remake in my mind because I've seen it so many times. So it just paled in comparison to the remakes in so many aspects. I couldn't enjoy it as much. I kind of wished I had more nostalgia for it, like I had seen it. I wish I'd seen it earlier. But the scene of it attacking the theater and the people running out is just iconic for a reason. I think it's really good.
It's a very, very, very striking. But for me, the original one is more of a fun time capsule, and the remake is a genuinely great horror movie.
And it's the movie that inspired director Joe Lynch to being a director. It's his favorite movie, I think.
Oh yeah, I read his 5-star review of it on Letterboxd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He'll go on and on about that movie. He loves it.
Yeah. So we got one more movie to talk about. This one's a little much more serious than The Blob, I'd say.
Yeah, this one's another classic where we went all the way back to the 50s for The Blob and then the late 80s for the Blob remake. And now we go somewhere in the middle to the 70s, 1973's Don't Look Now. This one's directed by Nicholas Roeg, who also directed The Man Who Fell to Earth with David Bowie, and also The Witches, that classic witch movie. And the co-writer is,
That was just remade with Anne Hathaway.
Oh, yeah. And the co-writer is Alan Scott, who went on to create The Queen's Gambit, which everybody is talking about right now with Anna Taylor-Joy. And it's worth mentioning because the editing is a big part of this movie. The editor is Graham Clifford, who also edited the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and he also edited Man Who Fell to Earth, which the director directed. It's adapted from a short story by Daphne du Maurier, and it stars Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland.
So I'm glad that you mentioned the editing of this movie because I think that I mean, obviously editing is so important, but it's particularly instrumental in this movie in terms of the effect that it has on you. It had kind of a weird effect on me. I wouldn't describe this as surreal in any way. It's kind of realism, but it has the type of quality that makes you feel like you're wandering through a waking dream in a daze as the movie goes on. It has like a very cerebral, slightly haunting quality. And the horror of the movie is very, very, very subtle, but it is there. There's always something that feels a little bit off that you could never put your fingers on, but it never really delves into being full on surreal. But I think it does a good job of putting you in the main character, Donald Sutherland's mindset. You feel like you're him wandering the streets of Venice, Italy, in kind of a weird, hazy state of mind, reminiscing about your daughter who died in a horrible accident, and kind of that kind of feeding on the fears of a serial killer loose in Venice, Italy, and it has beautiful locations too. I mean, it's awesome to see a movie filmed in Venice, to see the city under the water and everything. So I think it's a great locale for a horror movie.
Yeah, one of the things I liked most about it was the locations and the performance by the two main actors, Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland. They play a married couple who travel to Venice after their daughter dies in an accident, and
Hmm.
they meet two sisters, one of whom claims to be a clairvoyant who is being contacted by their dead daughter, warning them of impending danger. And
Hmm.
the rest of the movie is kind of built on that. Uh, I love the two sisters. They're really cool, really entertaining. It's good performances by all the actors, and it's a strange but really good sex scene. That's where I think that's where I really started noticing the weird editing in the sex scene.
Editing patterns, because the editing does something interesting because it shows you what's going on juxtaposed with what's going on in the character's head at the same time, and the way that it weaves in and out of reality and the mind is very almost kind of intoxicating, and it's a very slow paced, quiet movie, but I was never bored by anything that was going on. I found all of it engaging.
Yeah, but I mean the because of the editing, the editing is really bold,
Hmm.
and it kind of foreshadows what's to come. It's kind of keeps throwing in little hints
Hmm.
of the twists that are coming up. But to me, it just comes off as really strange, and it's off-putting, but it's deliberately off-putting.
Hmm.
Like it's kind of trying to put you in the mindset of Donald Sutherland, and then it's an excellent reveal that's even scary. But for me, the reveal came too late.
Mm.
It was too much meandering in the strangeness, and the the editing, dare I say, came off as amateur to me, even though it wasn't amateur. It was very skilled editing, but it came off as amateur to me, the way it was kind of thrown in there, and to be deliberately off-putting. And if a director's being deliberately off-putting like that, I want it to lead somewhere, and it did lead to somewhere very satisfying. I love the climax, and it was very scary and very jarring, but it just came too late for me. It lost me for a while.
I couldn't disagree more on that. I think that if this wasn't edited in the way that it wouldn't do as good of a job of putting you in the mindset of Donald Sutherland's character, or putting him kind of his state. And yeah, it didn't come too slow for me. I kind of like that they were foreshadowing, because even though they're foreshadowing something that you're not very clear about. You can only speculate as to what all of these flashes to something actually mean. And that ending scene, here's another thing. I already knew the ending, and I had already seen the ending scene before I ever watched this movie, because I watched this special a long time ago. It was Bravo's like 100 scariest movie moments. So that kind of like um spoiled this movie for me like 10 years ago, so I've always known about the ending. So I knew what to expect, but what struck me is that when I saw it play in context, it actually gave me the chills and creeped me out, and I felt my heart drop a little bit. Like I could feel the hairs on my arm stand up. I was like, okay, I already knew it was coming. I already seen it, and the fact that it still creeped me out shows me, yeah, it was it was pretty effective. So I actually want to watch this movie again, because I feel like when I see it again, I'm gonna get a lot of clarifications on things, because it is a little bit of confusing. Sometimes I could see where it might be off putting, but now that I have a better grasp on the movie and what it's doing, I think I'll appreciate even more on a second viewing.
Yeah, I think I would like it more if I watched it again too,
Hmm.
because I mean, it was off-putting for me, but in a way that the director meant to be. I just didn't like feeling that way.
Hmm.
So he done exactly what he set out to do. I just didn't like the feeling it gave me. And plus, I've seen so many films at this point that deal with grief, especially the death of a child, and
Hmm.
I've seen it done so much better on other movies, like Hereditary. I think that explores grief in a much more, and that was off-putting at times as well.
Hmm.
But I think it explores grief in a much more intricate, detailed way that gets further inside
Well,
your head than this one
because
did.
that's more about grief than this one is. This one's more to me about how grief feeds paranoia, how it could feed a certain type of mindset in your brain, or at least that's my interpretation of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's bad in any way or that I didn't enjoy it. I enjoyed a lot of it, but it lost me somewhere in the third act is where it lost me. And
Mm-hmm.
it lost me for a good few minutes. And then it got to the point where this better lead to something. So it wasn't enjoyable for me for a period of time, but then I can't deny how effective and scary that climax is.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't aware of it before. So now that I'm aware of it and I know everything that's going on, I probably would enjoy it if I watched it again.
Mm-hmm.
Because that ending, ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. So I liked it a lot. I think, where is it available on? It's on Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
Although I will say this, if the movie hadn't ended like it did, it would have felt like a waste of time. It would have felt like we were being strung along on a weird journey for no reason. So I feel like it kind of ends up justifying what it was going towards the whole time.
Yeah. And some of it felt a little like a giallo.
I could see that.
Like the mystery and the kind of perplexing, almost like a dream state, because it's weird because it's like you said, it's a bit surreal and almost dreamlike, but it's not. It's all based in reality.
Yeah, so I think it had an interesting balance of being a movie that mostly traffics in realism while still making you feel like you're walking through some kind of waking nightmare or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I liked all three movies that we reviewed to varying degrees. I think they were all good, particularly the Blob remake and Don't Look Now. Glad I finally caught up on those, and you had a chance to catch up on a 50s cult gem.
Yeah. So now I have reference to say exactly why the Blob is a remake that's one of the few remakes that's better than the original.
And I think majority of the horror audience would probably be in consensus that the remake is a better film too.
Yeah. So I do believe that the Blob and Suspiria are my two favorite remakes. I think they do exactly what I want a remake to do. Kind of take the charm of the original and completely twist it and do something else with it.
Yeah, definitely. So we hope you enjoyed that podcast. Little bit more quiet than our recent podcast. Had to decompress. People have been going through a lot of heightened emotions lately, but remember, everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, and we're back to our normal podcast now because, man, I love those subgenre specials that we did all of October. I really enjoyed them. I learned a lot from them. I enjoyed taking a deep dive into all these subgenres, but holy shit, was that a lot of work from week to week.
Oh, yes, it was.
We'd watch sometimes 6, 7, 8 films to cram for these things. It kind of feels good to get back to the normal, just talking about news and shit we did and movies we watched.
Well, next week we'll be getting back to interviews. We were supposed to have Adam Marcus, the director of Jason Goes to Hell, this week, but had a discussion with him, and I think he's trying to calm a lot of people down, dealing with the election cycle. So I know in this country anyway, everybody gets stressed out around election season and everybody's in a frenzy and kind of distracted. So we had to talk, and I said it's probably better that we do this next week so you're in a more clear state of mind. So next week we'll be discussing Jason Goes to Hell with its director, Adam Marcus.
That kind of surprises me because I was more equipped to handle the weight that the election put on us, because as a filmmaker, you're so used to waiting for answers from festivals or distributors or producers. You're so used to, the hurry up and wait type of thing. So you're really train yourself to be patient. So I've been really patient through this whole thing.
Understandable. Well,
Optimistic.
Yep. So we'll come to you next week with a good interview. Also, visit us on social media, facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show, if you want to visit us on Facebook. And you could follow us on Instagram as well, @Pickles Horror Show. That's our Instagram. And we'll also put a link to our Flow page, so you can either listen to this on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, the platform of your choice. Till next week, folks, happy horror.
Happy horror.